Welcome to How to Build a Nonprofit, the only podcast dedicated to deep dive interviews with nonprofit founders about their journey, their why, board development, fundraising, staffing, leadership, and making a big impact. We ask courageous and visionary founders about their struggles and successes and everything in between. As a listener, all you have to do is learn and appreciate. I'm your host, Jordan Thierry, and this is How to Build a Nonprofit. In this episode, I interview Jackson Cooper, a veteran fundraiser and nonprofit leader, for a special two-part episode entitled Ask a Development Director. Jackson has a storied career in fundraising, the arts, and nonprofit leadership. He's played a part in probably every role you can imagine in the fundraising process, from drafting acknowledgement letters to writing grant proposals to planning capital campaigns to making big gift asks of major donors. He also teaches fundraising and nonprofit leadership at multiple universities and has 2 book projects underway, one on fundraising and the other on board development engagement. I reached out to some of our listeners that I know are leading or helping start nonprofits to invite them to submit questions they have for an experienced development director. And we received some amazing questions. So thank you to all the folks who submitted these really thoughtful prompts and fodder for our discussion. All this and more in today's episode, and I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. All right, Jackson, how you doing, man? I'm so excited to have this conversation with you today. Ask a Development Director. We got some really fantastic questions submitted from folks all over and doing all different types of nonprofit work in different parts of the country. So let's start by just jumping into some of these questions. Sound good? All right. This is submitted by Jack Patrici of A Call for Change Helpline. How do changemakers shape the scope of what funders see as priorities or see as even possible?
Well, I think one thing that is interesting is that funders, particularly, we're seeing a lot of foundations now where there's a lot, foundations now are becoming a lot broader with their funding scope, which is excellent and exciting. And I think they're meeting the moment of what's going on for sure here in the United States with cuts to federal funding and such. But I think foundations are looking more globally. I think corporations are still are moving towards and attempting to think globally, but there's still very specific issues with very specific geographic locations that are strategic for them. But I think in terms of articulating funding, the more that you can articulate your case for support in a way that is specific to your community and also your cause and the subsector. It sounds like that's a lot, but I've always when I've done case for support workshops, folks tend to say we do this because it's important, right? And I like to always encourage, think a lot broader. Like, why does your city, state, town deserve this organization? How is it? And also in terms of a subsector, like if it's an arts and culture institute, how are you different from the other company that is doing something similar down the road? So I think noticing what makes you unique and what makes you unique within the community you're in will appeal to funders, but also will come out of what will come out of that is actually this bigger statement about why funding you and supporting you is important to, honestly, the lives of the people around you. I'll just use the arts because that's the closest subsector I'm closest to, but I always say, people need to know that a city deserves a symphony orchestra, right? Like just as economic development, whatever we want to call it, like a city deserves that just as they deserve a park or an arboretum or a waterfront. And so I think it might sound very, evangelical or very, high end, but people need to be reminded about the resources and treasures that are in affecting their daily lives and that they need support. Otherwise, they will assume that the city will cover it or that it's funded by something else and not by the people who are in the city and location they're in.
No, that's right. The thing I would add to that as well is, the work of building a narrative, the story of the problem and how we got to this place is so important. It's a very nuanced approach, right? Because it's not necessarily something that you can do in a month or a week or just with one op-ed or with one video, right? It's really building that narrative over the course of years that helps people understand why your work is so critical, and why this problem, requires urgent attention and investment and energy, right? And so, like, just say, for example, we're thinking about like journalism and like community
Mhm.
journalism and
Yeah.
public
Yeah.
media, right? Um, how do we talk about the importance of public journalism, community media? Well, we have to talk about like what's happened to the journalism industry over the last
Right.
like 15 to
Yeah.
20 years,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
It's a great
And like
point.
the decline, the decrease in like the number of even publications that a community has access to, and stories that are being covered, and the conglomeration of major media outlets, right? So like
Hmm.
there's really
Right.
a lack of voices in the space, and journalism has directly correlates with like people's ideas of democracy and understanding of democracy and what's happening in our communities and in the society at large. It's it's a vital component of our society, right? And so, but how do you have to build that narrative. You have to help
Right.
articulate like this is how kind of how we got here, and this is what we're trying to do about it now.
Yeah.
And instead of jumping right into here's our programs, here's what we need money for,
Yeah. Well, and I think too, without going straight to public media is dying, save us. And that's such a great point because it's like you do also have to pace out your story. You have to
Exactly.
have an arc throughout the year, and that you can educate and talk about the history of public media and funding, and also have a donate button at the end of that email, right? Like that is cultivation. That's information and education about the cause and why it's important. And then your next email correspondence can be about what you all what your local NPR station is doing, or the impact. And so, and not saying everything can be an ask, but everything can be incorporated into a mechanism by which somebody could give or feel inspired to give. But we are, I have said, like, to executive directors and development directors, we are chief storytelling officers.
Yeah.
That is our role. That is it. Everyone, I mean, and the only difference between the ED and the DoD is, the DoD is very much a primary solicitor of the organization.
Mm.
But everyone tells a story, and the development department has a real power in shaping the arc of what a donor or potential donor or community sees in a way that maybe their marketing colleagues might be a little more focused on some specific ROIs or transactional things. But I think it's really important to have that. So it's a really good point.
Absolutely. So let's take a moment to just like learn a little bit more about your work.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
a fundraising professor, or I don't want to say veteran. I don't want to make you sound old, but
I'm
development
a
director. Yeah.
I'm a recovering frontline fundraiser.
Yeah.
Yes.
You've been in it for a long time. You've also served as an
Yeah.
executive director.
Yep. Twice over. Yep.
Yeah. So, let's start with like what you're doing now.
Yeah, yeah. So right now I'm just leading my own consulting practice, which is really exciting. And as you had mentioned, a professor of nonprofit and leadership and fundraising at University of North Carolina at Greensboro and Seattle University, and working on some books, which is really exciting. So co-authoring a book on how to create sustainable fundraising practices for your organization, mainly, and that's co-authored with my colleague Hannah Greneman at UNCG, Columbia Business School Publishing, coming out with that soon. And that really focuses on sort of this new framework for how to create sustainability for your fundraising shop, but also your fundraising people. So how to prevent burnout, how to really create boundaries with donors and board members, and sort of, but not in a, we do balance philosophical with very practical, including something I'm very proud of, which is sort of how do we address wealth as fundraisers, so that we're not scared to talk to people who are of a certain wealth bracket. And then working on another book on nonprofit boards for the For Dummy series. So very excited to dive into that with my colleague, Caitlin Pontarella. And but I started in fundraising very early. That was my after school internship, actually, was writing thank you notes to major donors. And then as I joke, I got stuck in it. So I never left, which was great because I was taught that fundraising is all about just talking about what you love and people hand you checks. And I was like, well, that sounds great. And yeah, I've been very lucky to go through have a lot of great mentors who I want to say, like, a lot of it was luck, but a lot of it was a lot of mentors who just kept saying, "Hey, you should try this," or "Hey, why don't you come to sit into this gala planning meeting and just listen," or this is how. Why don't you come to a board meeting? I want you to meet board members, and I just sort of sponged it up. I mean, I really did. It was, and but I think above all, I got into this because of arts nonprofits, but the more I started studying like nonprofits and sort of the impact of charity and purpose to create, a better society, really, I just got so inspired. And so now teaching next generation, still working with organizations, it's been really exciting. So I'm very, very lucky and very, I feel like I've made it going on your podcast, though. Like I feel, so
You're official now. You're official now.
I
You got the
am. I can
validation
retire.
stamp.
I can retire now. I don't need anything else now that I'm on here. But no. So that's a little bit about me, and it's been great. I will say, like, hardest thing though was frontline fundraising during COVID. That was really the hardest thing, harder than being an executive director, harder than that. But I learned a lot through that time and that was sort of a shifting point in my career because I'd been doing it for quite some time, but like really having to think about how do you articulate to donors during a pandemic, your gift is paying for people's salaries and healthcare.
Yeah.
That really sort of activated a different part of me as a professional. Before I had just been sort of fundraising to bring the most amount of people to the things that were powerful. But then at that point, I realized like philanthropy and fundraising and nonprofits were really, it was all about people giving to people. And that really compelled me to start writing and start teaching and sort of this service mindset. So I was, while the pandemic was extremely traumatic and such, I was really grateful for that moment to take a pause and be like, oh, it's not just about supporting what you like, it's supporting people and their livelihoods.
Yeah. That's not something I've thought much about. You having worked for was the Pacific Northwest Ballet.
Yeah, where I was asking people for, we were shut down during COVID
Right.
and we didn't lay anybody off.
Wow.
Dancers were unionized, so that was guaranteed income that we had to raise. And yeah, that was during COVID. I did that. Yeah.
The performing arts were hit pretty hard during COVID.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And they were also reckoning, as everyone was reckoning with equity, diversity, inclusion, anti-racism in summer of 2020. And it was interesting because while I was doing that during the day, I was getting my master's in arts leadership from Seattle U, and my thesis was about tracking from 2020 to 2022 the commitments to equity and anti-racism through budget and HR practices from arts organizations. So I studied, I interviewed around 100 executive and artistic directors of arts organizations, sort of about, between the time that folks were putting out equity statements all the way through, post-pandemic quote unquote budget cycles, how did those line up? So it was just a really interesting sort of, and I'm only now, like, God, years later, recognizing like how educational both experiences were at the time. So it was like, here I was raising money for, healthcare of dancers and staff. And then at night, I was sort of tracking how change was actually going to happen and sort of what were the actions put to words or not. And spoiler alert, they were not. So,
Yeah.
For the majority. And I kind of had a big light bulb moment where I was like, oh, yeah, we need to do better as a sector, not just as an arts sector, but I think nonprofits as well. Yeah.
Yeah, 1,000% agree. And I have a question that was submitted, kind of related to that, to what you're speaking to. This question is submitted by Patty Narvaez Wheeler of Practica Consulting. How do we ensure that the way our development teams speak about our mission and communities is compelling to donors, but honor the dignity of communities and our our clients or our program participants?
Well, in a very practical way, I think speaking for the community, you have to be very careful speaking for the community or on behalf of the community. So it has to be about speaking to the community about what you do, and that may mean that you will have to reevaluate how, literally, like how you talk about it, like the words, the phrases, and you have to be very blunt. Like if you've been doing a gala for the last 8 years and no one has ever asked why you haven't done that, why we've been doing a gala, right? So there has to be consistent self-awareness and reflection. And I always say, like, when you're talking about a case for support in particular, your case for support should change every single year because you change every single year as an organization. Public media is a really great example. I think they are capturing the moment, and this isn't a criticism, but I think, they should also build in what you were saying with education and such. Otherwise, it does become reactive fundraising because we're just trying to raise money in the moment and capture attention to urgency rather than sort of thoughtfully curating like the impact of what happens if this is not in our lives long term. And so I think, I think they need to be consistently reflective of the language they're using. And then back to our earlier point, I think feedback, utilizing stories, obviously with respect and confidentiality of people's names and donors' profiles. But I think it would be radical if, you built a case for support off of feedback and all from the donors. Like, what would it look like if your donor community built your case for support? I think capital campaigns triggered that a lot. And I think we need to be doing it a lot more and not just when we have to raise a boatload of money from our community. So I think some thoughtful time set aside every single year to reevaluate how we're talking about ourselves and then disseminating it amongst the staff, like really having like a coaching session or a training session, and defaulting if you're not able to talk about projects or capital projects or programs, just talking about the impact and importance of what you do. I think we do that well as fundraising professionals when boards want to get involved in fundraising. We give talking points, we coach them.
Yeah.
But we don't really do that as often or set aside dedicated time for our teams. And I do think that does also not just lie with the director of development, but I think the executive director really needs to be leading that as well.
Yeah. And I think I agree. And I also think that, for organizations that are trying to speak to donors about the impact that the program is having on their communities, I also don't think that we do those kind of like trainings for community people who are being asked to come and give testimony on their experience, right? You talked about, the galas, like oftentimes there's someone, they have someone that was a program participant, an example of success of the program, come and speak at the gala, right? Or even in the videos, the short documentaries about the programs and stuff like that. I see a lot of organizations just jump in and start asking people questions without kind of giving them like awareness of the context of who the audience is, who they're speaking to, and also like, making sure that their story, they're happy with the way that they have a chance to think about how they want to tell their story to that particular audience, right? Because it may be an audience that's, a very different demographic than they are. And so I think, helping people prepare for that, giving them the tools to be successful, to have choice, right? It's sort of like an angle of informed consent is also really, really important. Let's go to some more like startup kind of questions.
Oh, okay. All right.
So this is from Chandler Hoffman of Tribe One, former guest on the podcast. How should new organizations think about laying the foundation for long-term fundraising strategy from the start?
Yeah, I'll go back to be a broken record. I'll go back to case for support. I think, take that time to build that case for support of what you do, what problem are you solving, what are you doing to solve it, aka program services, and then what is the big, like, what is the ideal world that will emerge from, so that's mission, vision, and then of course programs. this is going to sound so basic, but I will say, once you have that in place, just start asking and not begging. Let's say that, not begging, but asking. Start putting it out there on marketing materials and say, donate today, support us, have a donate page, have a website, even if it's PayPal or Venmo. But, one of the things that has been studied, and it sounds so basic, it sounds so kid's book, but people will not give unless they are asked. And so we can't assume that a paragraph of about me is going to trigger, oh, I should probably do this. It's almost like I teach my students, it's like, if you need help, you go and ask for help. No one's going to know that you're needing help, right? Like if you're struggling with something, it's going to take a long time for someone to come over and say, hey, are you struggling? Your closest people might, right? Your friends, your family, they'll hear something in your tone, but the day-to-day person is not going to know that, or your colleagues. So it's the same with nonprofits and fundraising. If people don't know what you need, or that you need it, number one, then yeah, you're not going to get donations. And I've been blunt a few times with nonprofits where I say, you don't have a donate button on your website.
Right.
So don't come to me. Oh yeah. So I mean, I've that's been like number one, where you go to the website. If I don't see a donate button, then don't come to me asking for help with fundraising, because you're not. And also the other thing is inconsistent communications around it. So if you're like, well, we send one letter at the end of the year on December 1, and we only, and that's it, and then we throw a gala in May, I'm going, okay, well, let's think about this. Your fiscal year starts in July. You're just doing stuff. So that's expenses, cost, out the window, right? And maybe a little bit of program revenue. And then you ask for a boatload of cash at the end of the year. Cool, great, taxes, everything. And then you wait until May, there are gaps. And so those are opportunity moments. And that's where we go back to, the cultivation stewardship. It's like you can fill those in with just emails about, hey, here's how this went and here's how that went. But you have to ask. You have to have, on a very basic level, just have a donate page, have a donate button, make an ask monthly, just have it in your newsletter, dedicated at the end of the month, donate to us. Here's what we accomplished. For startups, that's the most simplest thing. But where I think nonprofit or leaders of startups get is they're like, yeah, well, how am I supposed to do that and everything else? Well, build it into the everything else. It's one more email. You're building marketing emails, build a fundraising email. And it is as simple as saying, give a gift of $25 today in support of blah, blah, blah. There it is. Yep. You don't have to do a fancy schmancy 6-week campaign around funding a tractor, right? Like you don't have to make it a specific thing. You can just keep it simple.
Yeah. I agree. And I think, and I've been guilty of this myself, right? Of being like the nonprofit leader that's complaining about, no donations coming in, can't fundraise. And then
same.
And then it's like, well, wait, how many people are you actually asking? Like, how often are you asking for money? Like, if you're not asking, then you're not going to get any money. Like, no one's just out there. No one's out there just looking for organizations to just give money to randomly and just going to stumble on. It happens every once in a while, right? But like
every once, yes, it does happen.
That's not a strategy, right? And so, you got to get the reps in. That at some point, you get your infrastructure set up, you got your, your donate button or a way to accept money, an address to accept the check, and you just got to start asking for money, right?
Yeah. And I will say too, I've been guilty of this, which I will just go on the record and say this, where I have been the executive. I'm a fundraiser professional. And yes, I have been like, I don't have time to raise money because I have to finish this grant. Right. Like that's also something I've heard EDs go, well, I'm too busy, finishing this big grant. I can't go out and ask for money. And the fact is that yes, you can. And actually it's a lot easier to just build a solicitation email. It's like eighth of the time of writing a grant is building a solicitation email. So you can have multiple revenue streams happening at the same time. You don't necessarily have to go out and have lunch with everybody or go, just try to find new people on the street to give you money. So there are simple ways you can do it while also doing the sort of bigger things like strategic planning, board management, grant writing, those things that do take up a lot of deep work time. There are some pretty easy wins you can have with just, email communication or social media communication. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, that's a great transition to another question that was submitted. So this question was submitted by Jody Monroy of Reinventing Social Enterprise. How do I know if I should focus on individual donors or on grant proposals if I don't have time to do both?
Oh, well, hire a grant writer, number one.
What if you don't have money for a grant writer?
Oh gosh. Oh gosh, good follow-up. Well, then I would, then focus on individuals to fund a grant writer. I think it's a one after the other, right? I will say, I think always go individual first. Giving USA year over year has said that over 68% of all philanthropic dollars are from individuals. And I think something like 20% are from foundations, which are led by, wait for it, individuals. Individuals are always going to be the heart of philanthropy, and it goes back to people helping people. So I think if you don't have enough money to hire a grant writer, then double down on your communications to individuals and your asks to individuals. Obviously, putting it out there is one thing, but it really is also in the follow-up. It really is in the people and sort of noticing key indicators. If you put something out there and you're noticing that there are a few bigger gifts, like let's say you're a startup and you put out an email and you're asking for $25, but then there are people who are giving 500, right? Those are the folks that you can reach out to and say, really say thank you. I mean, say thank you to everybody in a thoughtful way, but really those are some folks that initially you want to start talking to and asking them, again, not for feedback, but just to say, what compelled you to donate, or what about our mission? And that is feedback too, is just saying, why did you give? And it doesn't mean that person has to become a board member. By no means does a major donor need to turn into a board member. Other soapbox. But I do think, always go individual first in anything, because grants take a long time. They are on a yearly basis, and they're also not guaranteed. And it's a big risk that we take, putting a lot of faith in grants, and we ignore individuals. We ignore some pretty consistent cash flow if we spend all our time focusing on writing a grant.
Yeah, I mean, I'm also relearning this lesson. And when it comes down to making that choice between grant proposals or soliciting individual donors, I agree with you. Focusing on individual first would be my recommendation for the vast majority of nonprofit organizations out there, right? Most of my career has been spent working directly with foundations. And so I feel like I kind of been predisposed to the grant strategy. And have, because of the relationships and the expertise that I've been able to develop over the years, feel fairly confident in putting forth strong grant proposals, right? But my recommendation to most nonprofits is to really start with individuals, the people that you know. I mean, if you're passionate about what you're doing and people see that, and and they believe in what you're doing, or they believe in you, even, they're gonna give a gift of support. That's just a fact, I think. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Most cases.
And ideally, I mean, you're not doing it alone. I mean, if you are starting a nonprofit, you have a board and you have people who, yes, know people, and you can do that peer-to-peer thing, but you can also just lean on them to help support writing appeal language, right? Or, get your board active in fundraising. You may want to have somebody on there who knows fundraising, just period. Ideally, you have someone on a nonprofit board who has worked for a nonprofit, but you really do want to lean on the folks who are close to you and already helping. And that goes the same for donors. If you have donors there already giving to you, lean in and ask them if they would like to upgrade, or if they know folks, like really, really lean into your donor community. It takes 12 to 18 months and a lot of money to transition a prospect who's never given to becoming a donor. So think about how you spend your time is very important as a fundraiser.
Thanks for listening to How to Build a Nonprofit. If you liked the episode, check out the show notes for a link to donate to our guest organization and give us a rave review while you're at it. Feel free to leave comments and questions on your app about what intrigued you most. If you have any suggestions for future guests, email us at howtobuildanonprofit@gmail.com.